spun that story into some spectacular things. And jumping off of that story that we just read, we've told some even more spectacular stories, and we're familiar with some of them. You know, the lowly shepherds, the poor couple, the no room in the inn, on and on and on. Right, we've gone on about these stories, and we've spun stories about how it is that the shepherds somehow were malcontents out there in their fields that nobody trusted, and on and on and on. You know, the poor innkeeper. You ever thought about the innkeeper? For 2,000 years, that innkeeper has gone to short end. On and on. We told these stories. And sometimes it sounded remarkable. It sounded remarkable that somehow in the midst of all of this, it's part of our legend. Right? And we've spun these stories. But tonight, I want to tell you what I think is even more remarkable about the story that we just heard. Because there is a more remarkable story than just angels and shepherds and innkeepers and swallowing clods. And the story is this. I think when St. Luke was telling this story, he had a very distinct group of people in mind. And I think they didn't look too different from us. Because in this story, when you listen to it, what you hear is he's making fun of Caesar. Right? Because Caesar has this title attached to him, Caesar Augustus, the bringer of peace. And in our story, what we see is that peace is kind of bumping down a dusty road on the back of the mountain. You know, we think peace comes from the work of government, the work of somebody powerful. St. Luke thinks that peace comes on the back of the road. And when we hear these stories of Mary and Joseph, of course they were poor. Of course they were poor. Everybody was either rich or poor. Not many people were rich. Of course they were poor. Everybody's poor. The average person was poor. And shepherds, they were just doing a job. They were people who were doing a job. They were people who were trying to make a living, make a way. Does that sound like anybody you know? Does it sound like anybody you're acquainted with? People who are trying to make their way in the world. People who are trying to make some sense out of the world. People who are trying to make ends meet. Have you ever met anybody like that? You know anybody like that? I know a lot of people like that. About 300 like that. When St. Luke tells this story, the remarkable thing about the story has nothing to do with shepherds or innkeepers or swaddling cloths. The story is being told by the most ordinary people in the world of time. The remarkable thing about this story is that it really, in many ways, is about people who aren't terribly unlike us. Oh, sure, I mean, we do different things. We live in a different place. We live in a different time. And we experience the world in a different way. But for St. Luke, these were the most ordinary people you could have ever found. A man and a woman riding standard transportation, finding their way to the places that they gotta go. St. Luke says that from this comes the peace of the world. From this comes the hope of everything that the world could ever hope for. From this story comes life. And it comes out of the lives of people who in many ways, fast forward in 2,000 years, very well could have been us. See, the story is about you and me. The story is about things that for all of the world look unremarkable. The story is about, for all of the world, things that could have been just passed on by. The story is about ordinary people in an ordinary church who think that the world is just kind of out there. Sorry, it's not people like us. Which means, when we hope for the future of the world, God has left it into our hands. God has passed this story on to people like us, because that's the ones who have always carried the story forward. People like us. If you want to hope for a better world, look to your left, to your right. Because the hope for a better world is given by God's grace to the people who are to your left and to your right. If you hope for a better story and a better place in this world for our children, look in front of you. I do. Because God has entrusted the story of salvation to the likes of ordinary people like us. He passes it on to people like us, to be passed on and spread throughout the world, to make a difference, because it has been ordinary people in the most ordinary places who have the most ordinary vocations that God has called to tell the story. We come here thinking somehow God has spun this remarkable story and taken these people that you could never have found anyplace else. But the truth is, He could find them right here, sitting in our pews, waiting for something to happen in our lives. See, that's one of the great things about Christmas Eve. We gather all of you together. And some of you sometimes haven't been here for a while. Some of you might never have been here before. That's pretty cool. Because it's always about people who had never heard the story before. And about welcoming in people who can carry this story down the road. Welcoming in people who can carry this story to the next place. And telling the rest of the world that they have a handle on where peace, love, and hope can be found. People like us. Parish Church. Old Village. The end of Virginia. It's almost as if the story was being told again. God would park his donkey in our garage. I would hope for that somehow the story that is told tonight rings true. And the story that we tell again tonight finds a place in your hearts. Because it is people like us that God entrusts the very hope of the world. It is people like us that God calls to be his people in this world, to do his things in this world, to transform this world into his image. May God bless you with the gift of nothing less than his very presence, the hope of the world placed in your heart, to go your way